Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Men of the Kingdom podcast. I am Kyle. This is my co-host, Aaron. We always say we're super excited to be back, and now I genuinely feel like I'm actually very excited to be back because if you haven't noticed, if you're one of our faithful watchers, it's been a little while since we've recorded an episode. A lot of things have changed in our lives since our 14th episode. So, Aaron, I'm going to let you jump in and kind of just catch the viewers up on some of the things that's maybe going on in your life and why there was a little bit of the break between our last episode.
Yeah. So if you're super observant, like we know most of our viewers are, you might notice that there's a small change in this episode.
Is it your shirt?
We won't give you any cues as to what it specifically is, if it's clothing. But if you're watching closely, you might see that we're in an entirely new location.
Yep.
So we just moved, we just relocated. So this is officially the second Men of the Kingdom studio. But Kyle, I know you're the AV guy, you're the details guy. So how's the new studio feeling to you so far?
Oh, so far, so good. I mean, Aaron, we could be recording outside as long as I'm with you. I would be very happy. But no, it does feel good. As you guys can see, there's a little bit more space here. We're still kind of figuring out logistics, where we want to be permanently when it comes to recording our podcast and the show here. But for the time being, this is the space we have chosen. So hopefully you guys like it. I know you're a little sad that you can't see all of our wonderful books like you could at the last place, but hopefully we'll bring those back and we'll get a little bit of a better spot for us. So, yeah, kind of a transition of life with a new place and things going on. So just before we jump in here, how have you been? Obviously, we're in a new place. Is there anything else in your life you feel like, I know there's one thing we wanted to touch on with our friend Beth. So I'm gonna kick it to you and you can kind of fill people in because I know how much she meant to both of us.
Yeah, so just crazy time of transition. So if you are somebody who watches the show regularly, we appreciate you sticking with us. And I think though it's also kind of just a reflection of the reality of what we're in right now, the season of life that we're in. As you know, if you watch the show, I got engaged this summer. So doing wedding planning, we just moved. Kyle and I have both had job changes pretty recently. I definitely want to have you talk a little bit about some of the church stuff that has changed with you and what's going on there. But it's cool. And I hope that, my ask of you guys would be to look at it in the sense of, you know what, these guys are doing a lot of great things. But with that, Kyle and I have really felt it on our hearts that we can tell that we haven't been recording and we haven't been talking to you guys. So this is a huge part of what gets us super fired up of, trying to learn and talk to people and gather as much information as we can so we can share it with you guys. And we're in a season of life now where we're doing a lot of learning, and I'm hopeful that transitions to some great podcast content. But I'll talk about Beth a little bit, and then I'd love to hear some of what's new in your life as well. But for those of you who have watched every episode, you may have seen the one with Dave and Beth Orlowsky. So that episode was titled Living Fearless and Free. Mm-hmm. And if I had to describe Beth's life, there's no better way to put it than the title of her book. Just absolutely radiated joy. If you go through all of our episodes, even the last one a month ago, Beth literally commented on every single show. And we joked that she even commented on the worst shows. She could still find something nice to say, which is hard. But Beth did recently, between the last time we recorded and now, end her battle with cancer. So in worldly terms, that means that she's passed away. But in Beth's definition, it means that she beat us to heaven. Yeah. And that's something we can rejoice about. I know if Beth was listening, that's how she'd want us to put it. And we're going to honor her with this episode, not only this one, but really everything that we do. So Dave, Nick, if any of you guys are watching it, we love you guys. We love your family. You're a huge part of the reason we wanted to start this podcast. And every week we're just going to be on here trying to make Beth proud. So we're going to probably allude to her more because it's going to be pretty much impossible to talk about our spiritual journey without someone like her who's a pillar of faith coming up. But I did want to share that with our audience. We'll link the episode if you haven't already seen it. But we could literally do an episode just about Beth, and maybe one day we'll do that and some sort of way or another. But I know that was a big thing that happened in the last few weeks, and a hole that we'll definitely feel for a while.
No doubt. Yeah, Beth, you guys probably know how much she meant to us. Often you think about people and the influence they had on you based on direct interaction and stuff. Mm-hmm. But I think for Beth, when she comes to mind, I feel like I learned more from her and the times I never talked to her. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Just watching her live, and you talk about someone who lives by what they believe in, their life's reflected. She was just a pillar of joy, even in the hard times, and just her faithfulness is something I hope to one day have half of. She was just
no doubt
a wonderful lady. So I want to kind of jump into it because we were trying to think here, what would be something we'd want to talk about. And it seems like in life, when you're transitioning, you're going through a lot of tough times. That seems like when you learn the most. Like when you go through a breakup, you learn a lot, or just other challenging things. Even with Beth, like her passing was really tough. And we thought about just some of the lessons we've learned in these last 6 months to a year, where it's like, man, we feel like watching you, I know you've grown a lot. I feel like myself personally, I've just grown a lot in a lot of different areas of my life. So really this episode is dedicated to some of the top lessons we've learned either right now or in the past months. Hopefully you guys can resonate with them or learn from some of the things we have and apply it to your life here. So I just want to jump into it, Aaron. If you want to kick us off, talk to me a little bit about some of the lessons you've been learning right now that you want to share with our viewers.
Cool. So I'll get into the first one, and I'm going to cap it with another bookmark as a reminder that this has to do with how our life has changed, even as being roommates. So my first lesson, you guys, is just that life changes quickly. And that sounds so simple, but it's actually supported by scripture too. So if you look at the book of Ecclesiastes written by Solomon, he says there's a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. When you really think about that, just what I wrote down here is we see life as just another normal day. I'm waking up, I'm going to work, I'm seeing some friends, maybe I have church group, maybe I have a social activity, maybe I'm seeing my girlfriend, whatever it may be. But when you really think about what life was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, for us, what life was 3 months ago, right? I mean, even a month ago, you can go look at that podcast episode a month ago, and Beth commented on it. Encouragement, talking about things. Beth's not on earth anymore. Yep. So that just is a huge lesson that I have had just on my heart lately is, wow, 6-8 months ago, I was not engaged. Someone like Beth was still in my life. I lived in a different house. Your schedule changed. That's what I want you to talk about is what you're doing now where that has a time commitment on your end. So that's part of why we're recording the podcast on different nights. And change is very, very exciting. It's one of the most blessed parts of life. I think it's how God blesses us is through change and opportunity and all that. But my application and my reason for mentioning this to you guys is to just look at your life. And I am totally preaching to myself, preaching to you as well. Kyle and I are very similar. We're type A. We're go, go, go. We have a never-ending to-do list that when it gets done, there's just more things that we're adding. So we struggle in the sense of we don't have any problem self-starting and coming up with things to do. We struggle with slowing down.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And that's my lesson is that life changes quickly. And I think it's like a 90s TV show said, like, if you don't stop to look around every once in a while, you miss it. And I think that's very true. My first thought when I heard the news about Beth was, why didn't we go have dinner with Beth and Dave and ask them a million more questions? And we can still do that with Dave. We're still going to have a great relationship with Dave. You just realize, though, that the people you're living by, your neighbors are probably not going to be the same. Your friends might not be the same. Your job might not be the same. So just soak that all in. The application I have here is just be grateful. Intentionally take time to think about the things you're grateful for in this season of life. Give God glory for the gifts he's given you and just love the people that are around you because as Beth is a great example of, you never know next week, tomorrow, next year, eventually it's all going to go away. So while you're here, give God the glory for it and just observe how quickly life can change. With that though, one of the things I wanted you to talk about, and maybe you can transition into one of your lessons, but I alluded to how we had to change the podcast recording night. So that's for great reason. I know Kyle was talking about how he's seen me grow. I might be biased, but I think he's grown even more than I have in the last 6-8 months. It's just, I feel like he's on this rocket trajectory of just going straight up. So I would love for you just to talk about what's new on the faith side and kind of some of the things you have going on. And, maybe even that might be where one or two of your lessons have came from. I'm sure you've learned a lot from that.
For sure have. Before I do touch on that, I just want to touch on your point where you talk about life changes quickly. I'll never forget it. I think this is one of those memories that's going to forever be ingrained in me. And this is when we were sitting on one of our teachers from college. And it was only, 3.5 years ago, which seems like a lot, but really it's like that. But Aaron and I were both sitting on this patio on someone's house that wasn't ours. And we were just talking. We had no idea where we were going to be, where we were going to end up. We just graduated school. We were about to. And it was just so different. Now I look back how different and how truly fast life moves. I was about to move back in with my parents back home while I was looking for jobs. I don't even know what you were planning to do.
Me either.
Literally. I had no idea. And we were just talking. And I think we both, I just remember at like some piece. I can't remember exactly what you said, but I thought it was something around the lines of just like, you knew we were going to do good things and big things. We just didn't know what that would look like. And now it's 3.5 short years later. We've been living together for over a year. You're engaged to get married to the girl you love next year. And it's just like really hard sometimes to slow down and like think about that. And I'm so thankful for everything we've been through and where we are at. But it's like, man, those are good times. These are great times. And like, it does really move fast. So soaking it in and being able to slow down. So I just, when you were telling that, you know, your point, I just remember sitting on that porch and it felt like really real because here we are doing this, talking as usual. So it's just
the gift of prophecy.
Very, very thankful. So yeah, as Aaron alluded to, today is Thursday. We're still figuring out our recording schedule, but normally we'd film on Tuesday nights, or was it Tuesday or Wednesday? I think it was.
We were doing Wednesdays.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wednesday nights, but I had a pretty cool opportunity come up to lead a connection group. And if you're not familiar with what a connection group is, it's basically a small group from our church, Salt City Church, and you know, leading that. So it sounds fancy, like I'm a leader, but really I'm just there to learn just like everybody else is. And that happens to fall on a Wednesday night. So Aaron and I are shifting our schedules around. But yeah, that was one of my points in the season of life I am and learning is just like stepping out and lead. And it's not necessarily that you're in a leadership position. It's just answering the call. And that can look like a lot of different things for a lot of different people. It's just when you feel the nudge and you feel like the Holy Spirit talking to you, take action. We talked about this at our connection group last night. You know, you see that person on the street and you kind of feel like, I should do something. Do you do it or not? You know, other areas of life, just leading in all areas of life. And I think that's something I've been learning, and I never want to make excuses for anything. If something doesn't get done, even if I couldn't maybe necessarily impact it, I always ask myself, what could I have done? So I think that's the lesson I've been learning right now, is just leading in all areas of your life, whether that's professionally, in relationships. I'm single, so it's a little bit different there, but just everywhere. Stepping out and lead, answering the call, and you might not have all the answers, but I just feel like when I've done that, I've just learned so much in the last 6 months. And I think a big part of that is just being willing to get out there. So that's lesson number one I've been learning. And it is, you know, scripturally based too. Like as men, we are called to be leaders and do those things. But you know, I fall down. I'm not perfect, but you know, it does take faith to step out. But really, you know, where's God leading me in those situations? So it's been a good area of life. I'm very thankful to be where I am. It's just like you talked about. We're both very busy guys who like to keep doing things, and sometimes it's hard to slow down a little bit. So I'm very thankful, and that is my first lesson that I've learned lately: is step out and lead when called.
Cool. Yeah, I love it. So if you're soaking in the quickly changing life and you're stepping out and leading, I think that's huge. But I have a lesson that I think naturally falls into that, which this has just been so convicting. Our church has been talking a lot about it, and
I feel like I know this.
Yeah, you may know it, but our church has been talking a lot about it. Kyle's leading a connection group at our church. Is called Salt City Church. So if you're watching it, we're in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. Meet on the campus of the University of Minnesota in a beautiful hotel called The Graduate. If you need a small group, you got a great small group leader right here.
And while you're on that point, if you haven't already, check out our website, MOTK, I think it was MOTKshow.com. We actually have under the resources tab, you can check out Salt City Church and a bunch of other opportunities and stuff. So if you are looking, feel free to check it out.
Boom.
As you were.
I'm glad you still remembered the URL. That's better than I
would
have done.
I almost had to look it back up. It's been a while here.
Definitely. So, okay, so first two lessons: slow down, soak in the ever-changing seasons of life. Kyle's lesson: step out in leadership. I'm going to go a little bit of a different tune, but this has just been on my heart a lot, which is that love is everything. And I say that because it kind of contrasts the last two lessons, right? You can be grateful. You can be a leader. If you're not a loving person, I really don't think any of that even matters. And I do think that leadership is an act of love, of saying, I'm willing to sacrifice for you and I'm willing to put risk into this for you. But the verse I have for this is from 1 Corinthians, which I think all my verses for this one and the next one are from 1 Corinthians. But this is Paul writing to the church in Corinth. And chapter 13 here, verse 13, it says, "Now these three remain, faith, hope, and love, but love is the greatest of all these." So I don't want to give a spoiler alert to my last lesson, but it'll make more sense when you see that one. But I think that's the best, so we'll save it for last. So when I think through this, and by think, I mean use my study Bible to help me think and give me some good tips. But the way that they broke it down made a lot of sense to me, which is, so the verse alludes to faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of all these is love. So when you think about being in heaven, like where Beth is right now, rejoicing in heaven, and read what the Bible says about heaven, where, you know, and again, I don't want to get too far ahead, but when we're in heaven, we're not going to need faith because we'll already be with Jesus. We'll see him face to face, so no faith will be needed. The hope that we have to get there will have been fulfilled, right? Mm. We hope to be in heaven. Now we're there. So the faith, the hope, not needed anymore, but love is what heaven is all about. So I think that's so interesting. You know, the concept of beginning with the end in mind. I think we need to make that primary on earth as well, right, rather than just waiting till heaven. So I put a few notes here too, that just love helps you utilize all your other gifts as well. So when it comes to leadership, I'm a big believer that nobody else cares. You know, if you have somebody at work, and we all work with people like this, we've all been like this at times, where you might be the most knowledgeable person in the room, but if you're not the most loving, if you're not the most caring, really, it doesn't even matter. Yeah. I think we all would agree that we'd rather work with someone who knows a little bit less, but is just incredible to work with, cares about you, is genuine. Sure. You know, that matters most. And the quote that came to mind is, you know, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. That's what I was thinking about too. Yeah, it's just what it comes down to. So I really believe that as Christian and as Christian men, our highest calling is to love. And that's in Mark 2, where Mark says, you know, or Jesus is teaching to the apostles, and he says, love your neighbor as yourself. So the order of that, I look at it as love God, love yourself, and then love others. So the application here is, think about that. Starting with loving God, what does your relationship look like spiritually? Are you giving thanks for those good gifts? A question that boggles my mind sometimes is, what if the next morning when you woke up, you only had the things that you thank God for the day before? Mm. And I remember reading that one time thinking, wow, I would have nothing because I haven't prayed for weeks or whatever. Yeah. But what I have for the application here is, I'll get practical too, is just really be intentional with the ways you can love better. And this is actually a tribute to Dave and Beth too. They talked a lot about how during Beth's treatment, a lot of people were very intentional with how they love them. Yeah. And that's not an accident, right? You don't become someone who's really good at loving other people just by nature. By nature, we're selfish. We're thinking about our own problems. But a way that I think you could do that is get to know the 5 love languages. Really great book by a guy named Gary Chapman. And above and beyond that too, just learn how the people around you receive love. Like if there are people that appreciate words of affirmation, do that. If you give someone a gift and you can tell that means a lot to them, give them small, thoughtful gifts. Yeah. So whatever it is, just learn how to love the people around you better. And then another application I had is, if you mess up or if you're acting not in accordance with the way you want to be, I think as men, this is something we have a huge problem with, but don't be afraid to say, hey, I was acting out of line. I was being selfish. I was in a hurry. I mistreated you. I made a joke that wasn't funny, whatever it is. Just don't be afraid to have humility and ask for forgiveness if you're doing something that doesn't line up with the way you want to be acting. So no doubt that one was long, but I think it's worthy of a little bit of time. And the lesson there is that love is everything. Yeah, that's really good. And mine kind of goes hand in hand to that. Sometimes we don't really compare notes, but it's funny when we sit down, it's like, man, these kind of flow and they build off each other. So this was not planned or intentional, but really in line with that. My other lesson I've been learning a lot lately is just like focus on building relationships with people. Mm. And I think really the only way you can do that or have really effective relationships is out of love. Mm-hmm. Like if you're just manufacturing it, you're just forcing it, it's not going to be good. And as I'm kind of going through this leadership phase, as my point was in the first one, a lot of these books I read around leadership stuff, they talk a lot about relationships, and you have to develop that if you want a team who trusts you and to get the most out of your team. And I think lately I think, in a very humble spirit, naturally my disposition is I'm a very relationship-driven guy. I love communicating with people. I want to get to know people, and I'm very thankful for that. But it's just amazing
And not that the intention was this, but what comes out of life when you have good relationships with people, not even so much what you can get or what they might provide, but really just how much more fun life is and just how much more enjoyable it is. So focus on building those relationships with people. So it's not always easy either. It's not always the people you think like, oh, I'm going to be friends with this person, this person, this person. There are those people who might be frustrating or harder to reach, but that doesn't mean you give up on them. And they might not be at that level as other people, but you can still build some type of relationship. So, I would just encourage a lot of people, have conversations that you might think would be uncomfortable. Like I'm telling you, it becomes easier as you go, whether it's in the gym, you can strike up a conversation with someone at the mall. It doesn't matter, but just, it might be uncomfortable at first, but the more you keep doing it, the better you get. So life is so much more enjoyable when you're building relationships with people. And it's kind of a momentum thing. You start meeting people, they know this person, they know this person. It's just weird how everything is so intertwined. So just been learning that a lot lately and trying to, cultivate that more in my life and actually build deep relationships. And because it does reach a point where it's like, okay, a lot of people, but what do they say, a mile wide and only an inch deep? Yeah. You do have to be intentional with who are those people you're really going to invest in, because it takes time. Yep. Like look at you and Sammy getting married next year. It's taken years to develop this relationship, and now, a lifetime together. But if you weren't giving her any time and not being intentional, you wouldn't be at this point. So know the people you do want to do that with, who are going to be around you and close to you, but have deep relationships and take the time to invest in people.
Yeah, that's an awesome tip. And I wish that we could do like a vlog style on Kyle, because he's literally the pro at that. And it's cool too, because that benefits people around you. I mean, I know that is a skill that benefits your business. It's probably going to help you draw people into your connection group. So that's really cool. And I guess too, kind of a follow-up question I have. I think that naturally you're somewhat good at that, but was there a time in your life where like that stuff was scary? Or like, do you think that there's like a time where you started doing that more? I'm just kind of curious, because I feel like you've been pretty good at it since I've known you, but I'd say that you've even gotten better at just being a good conversationalist and caring about people. I mean, just to give you a little peek behind the curtain too, every single day when I come home, when I see Kyle, he asks me questions for 10 minutes about how my day was, what I've been doing. One of the only people in my life that does that, so it goes a long ways.
It's a good question, honestly. I don't know when it switched. I do think it has gotten a lot better. Like looking back, it's not really something I track or say, oh, I had this many conversations then. I think it's just more, I think as you become more comfortable and confident in yourself, it's a lot easier to have conversations with people. Because I think a lot of people are nervous or turned off to communicate with people, or whatever the context might be, is because they aren't necessarily certain about themselves, or they feel like they have to hide something. Whenever you're living in a way where you feel like you're protecting or hiding something, it's hard to be authentic and open. My mindset now, I'll go talk to anyone, and if it's awkward and it sucks or they don't give me the time of day, I don't feel that personally. You know what I mean? Like sometimes, oh, am I not good enough or whatever? It's like, oh, you got rejected or whatever it might be. No problem. You move on. So I don't know where it came from. I used to be not the most social person or very good at conversation, but I learned a lot from you and a lot from books, and it's just something you just have to practice and do. But again, it comes from, I do want to love people and know people well, and I think that drives you to want to have conversations. So I think it's a combination of the practical things, where it's like, okay, I know if I ask these questions or this might trigger that, but I don't ever want it to be a strategy thing where I'm like pushing buttons to try to get people to do something. It's like, hey, I want you to feel loved and cared about and heard. That's why I'm taking this time to have this conversation with you. So I don't know where it comes from. I think it's just having a lot of good people in my life, and I genuinely enjoy it. It doesn't feel like a burden. I feel filled up when I have a good conversation with someone, and it's really, it gives back to me. It doesn't take anything away. So it's a good question.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that wasn't really a part of the kind of any of the lessons, but I was just more curious because I always love trying to get to understand how people got to be the way they are. Because I think a lot of people just assume that it's natural, but I mean, sometimes it is, right? Like maybe you're naturally more outgoing, so that's something you want to develop, but I can tell that it's probably something you've had to invest a lot in. So yeah, that's a great tip. And
I have to ask you then, I don't want to cut you off, but is there something in your life that you look back on where it's like, I used to be pretty poor at that, but now you would say you're maybe not proficient, but pretty good, or people recognize that in you, like, hey, he's good at this? I'd be curious, because maybe I'm trying to think what comes to mind for you from me.
Yeah.
But I'd be interested to hear you.
I mean, I think that just like sharing my opinion in general, and that kind of ties into like public speaking.
Yeah.
But I always used to be like in school afraid to like answer a question in class or whatever. And now, like on the daily at work, even there's times when sometimes I share my opinion about stuff and then I think, wow, maybe I shouldn't have even shared my opinion.
Yeah.
Just because, as you know, sometimes in the work we do, we're in marketing, you can kind of get talking in circles. But I've gotten to a point where no matter who it is, even if it's executives in our company or really big partners, I just feel comfortable. I feel more comfortable sharing my opinion than I would not, because I realize that if I don't share my opinion and then what I would have said comes to fruition, then I feel like I did them and myself a disservice. So I think that you probably would agree with this, and it sounds weird, but it's biblical too. I do think I have some weird gift of prophecy or foresight, where a lot of times if I'm involved in a situation, I can kind of project like what's going to happen. And I think when I was younger, I used to doubt that a lot more and just not really understand it. But I think that that's literally God talking to me, and that's a gift he's given me. And now I feel a lot more comfortable of like, if I'm getting bad vibes from something or I see something ending poorly, I don't do it. I think when I was younger, I would have just went with the flow a lot more and said, I might not feel like this is right, but the people around me want me to do it, so I will. Yeah. And I think that's just hand in hand with not being afraid to like trust my judgment or speak up, all those things.
I'd agree with that. Yeah. I mean, I've kind of, since knowing you, you've always had those weird, hey, I feel this way or this way. And it usually is, I can't really think of a time you were wrong with it. But yeah, I think you have I've seen it. Not that you were never confident, but you do speak up in a respectful way, but you're not afraid to make known, like, hey, this is how I'm feeling. Or it kind of reminds me of, I just read it recently in the Bible too, as we're going through that plan. Like, I can't remember the book it was, but let your no's be no's and your yeses be yeses. I think you've gotten very good at saying no to people and saying yes to people. And I'm sure there's areas maybe which you think about you can improve, but I think you do a good job. Like, hey, I've made my decision here. And that's it. And I've kind of had to learn to like, hey, I'm not going to try to persuade him. It's like, it is what it is. Like, you just have those good boundaries. And so you don't ever really leave space for gray space. I don't know. It's like, hey, you give someone an answer, no or yes. So I think you have gotten good at that.
Yeah. Well, and I'll give you a lot of credit too, because I think that I've learned from living with you and observing you that, a lot of times I think I would have been like less confrontational. I would have seen like disagreeing with people as like very confrontational. But I think I've learned from living with you, I've come to like respect that in a healthy way of like, if you go about it in a good way and you do it with an open mind and a caring attitude, sometimes confrontation can still be a bad thing and it's not necessary, but there's definitely times when it is. Right. And I've just seen you do that in a way where it's made your relationship stronger. It's made our friendship stronger. And I think that's something I've learned is that, hey, if it's done in the right way, it can be a good thing. So,
that's good.
I mean, I hope if you're watching this, these aren't maybe one of our 6 lessons that we're going through, but I think that a lot of times the way that we learn most from one another is just observing each other and trying to take lessons where we can. So I'm going to end with one that is more important than anything we just talked about in that last little tidbit. And this one is a huge shout out to Beth. It's not only my most important lesson for this podcast, but it's the most important lesson I think I learned from Beth and the way that she lived. And that lesson is that heaven is more real than earth. And if you had to explain Beth's motto, I think that's what it was. She was living not for this earth. She was not going to give any attention to her body that was literally decaying of cancer. She referred to herself as a trilingual triathlete, even though she couldn't barely walk. In that episode we did with her, she could barely walk up to the podcast studio. And if you watch that, I don't think anyone would ever have guessed. Her energy was on point. Even we said, we're like, we don't have to do this. If you want to do it, she's like, no, we are doing this. Why? Because she believed that sharing this message and sharing the kingdom of heaven was more important than her physical health and her physical comfort. So one of the questions we asked Beth, not on the record of the podcast, but afterwards, was what her favorite book was. Right. And it was a book called Imagine Heaven. I'm about halfway through it. I know you've read it, so I'd love if you could share anything on it too. But the whole kind of synopsis of the book is people who've had near-death experiences sharing what heaven is like. And people say their senses were raised, they felt things deeper, things felt more real, and essentially that they didn't want to come back to earth. And that lines up with what the Bible says too. And I just want you to, if you're watching this, I don't care if you're a devout Christian, you've been a Christian your whole life, or if you're watching it because you say, I get a kick out of listening to these quacks talk about something that makes no sense. Just ask yourself the question, is your soul satisfied, and has it ever truly been? And I don't know anyone I've ever met that could say, yes, since the day I was born until now, I am 100% satisfied. Because it's not the way it goes. We always want more. We get hurt. People hurt us. We hurt other people. And the reason is because our soul was not meant to be satisfied on earth. We are ultimately meant to be fulfilled in heaven, where we're spending eternity.
Right.
So my application there is, 1, you should buy Beth's book, Fearless and Free. 2, you should buy the book, Imagine Heaven. But I would just say, take the time to understand heaven, truly what the Bible says about it, how incredible it will be, and live for it. So again, plugging Greg, how Greg spends his life. Greg spends his life most nights, he's in the kitchen till 10:30 p.m., preparing meals to literally, most of the time, they're not even charging people for those meals, just giving them out for free. He's not living for this earth. He's living for heaven. And I think Beth did the same thing. So just realize and remember that your life will go in a snap. We're, as the Bible says, we're gone with the wind. We're due.
Vapor.
Yeah, we're vapor, leaving at dawn. So invest in the heavenly realm with your time, your talents, your resources, the way you treat people, the things you get worked up about. And anytime you're just frustrated, just realize that this is all so temporary and that heavenly realm is going to be eternity. So that's the lesson I was most excited to share. But what did you learn from that book and really Beth's book? And I just think that's a huge lesson. So I'd love to hear what you have on that one too.
For sure. Yeah, you hit on a lot of things that came to mind. It is a really good book. And I'd watched YouTube videos before I even knew that book. Mm-hmm. But it's so interesting how in line all these people who've had these experiences.
Right, from all over the world too. Yeah. Some believers, some not.
I think the one thing that was craziest in the book, not to spoil it for anybody, but a lot of times people think, well, there's a lot of different theories on why people experience it, but it was interesting. People who are blind since birth. Oh, so you have no reference or correlation to say, okay, this looks like X, because you have no point of reference. But the way they explain things, it still lines up with the same things that other people who could see in their earthly life could see. So that was just pretty convincing, but really, really good book. My last lesson actually kind of aligns in a way with what you're saying. Yeah, I think what Beth did a very good job of doing is her priorities were very straight, and what she was focused on was what she was focused on. And she, to your point, this lady went through a lot on this earth, and you wouldn't know it from face value if you weren't really close in her inner circle, because she was so focused on truths of the Bible, what God said, and heaven, that just fueled her and filled her up and kept her moving. So my last point, and this is applicable to everything in your life, and it sounds very cliche, but it's keep the main things the main things. And I think you think about your job for a second. Aaron and myself are both in the marketing realm, and it's really easy to have a really long list of to-dos. And sometimes you'll move some of the less important things up because it feels like you can knock them out quick. It feels like you're busy, you're being productive, but you get to the end of the day, the end of the week, the end of the month, you're like, gosh, I didn't really accomplish any big things. So trying to keep those main things, because I think we've come to realize we don't have that much time here throughout the day. It's like you're going to work for 8 hours a day, you're at the gym, and you get to the end of the day, you might have a few hours. So really prioritizing the important things in life. And when it comes to just life in general, it's what are the main things in your life? This is a question for you. This is a question for us. Where are you spending your time? That'll give you a big indicator of where your priorities lie. But do you live with an eternity mindset like Beth did? Are you thinking about heaven? Are you thinking, hey, what am I doing now that's either going to help other people or myself when we're no longer here? And that's something I've had to ask myself lately. It's like, man, what are the main things in my life? And does it really align with the things in my head I know it should be? And it's a convicting question to ask yourself because it's not always going to line up. But I think when you can keep the main things the main things, you might not get everything on your little checklist done, but you'll get to the end of the day and say, wow, I made a difference in these areas, and it's going to get you closer to where you want to be. Easier said than done, but the more we can get into that discipline of saying, hey, like what we were talking about you earlier, sometimes you have to say no to other things. It's not always fun or easy, but just for the sake of your time and being able to move towards where you want to be, you have to do that. So keep the main things the main thing. So why don't we recap? Why don't you run through your 3 real quick? I'll run through my 3, and then we'll shut her down here.
Cool, man. Yeah, I miss like the chills that I get when you share a great point, and it might just be that it's 45 degrees in Minnesota today. I'm not sure, but
It could be that.
that's a funny thing too, going back and looking at all the episodes and seeing last winter, we both have like pretty long hair, thick beards, we're wearing flannels, and then we slowly get into spring, then summer. Yeah. So, hey, we're back in fall, but
Going back.
and actually that is a nice tie-in to my lesson, which is that life changes quickly.
It does, like the seasons.
Just like the season. So my first lesson, life changes quickly. So take time to intentionally think about what you are grateful for in your current season of life. My second one is that love is everything, and practically think about ways you can love people around you better, including yourself. Don't forget to include yourself into that equation. And then the last one is just that heaven is more real than earth, and you should take time to understand heaven and invest your current earthly life into the heavenly realm.
I like it. Thank you. So my 3, just for recap, is focus on building relationships with people. Going a little bit out or here, I just have them written down different. So focus on building relationships with people. That goes in line with what Aaron said about loving people, finding ways to do that. It might not always be what you think is loving. They say the golden rule is, treat others as you'd like to be treated. And they say the platinum rule is treat others how they would like to be treated. And it just gets you thinking, it's like, man, not that what you're trying to do is bad. By doing those good things, it could still be a good thing. But some people, they receive love in different ways. So focus on building relationships with people. Number 2 is step out and lead. Doesn't have to necessarily be in the church context, work, just in all areas of your life. When you feel that calling to lead, make sure you do it. Take the step. Even if you're not sure all the answers, or if you have enough resources to do it, you'll thank yourself for it. And then finally, just keep the main things. Whether it's in your relationships with a romantic partner, wife, husband, work, whatever it is. Sit down, understand what are the big pillars of this, and focus on those things. Let the other small things, if you don't have time for them, don't worry about it. So, it feels good to be back on here. I'm still getting used to the new layout and everything, but it just feels like it's just really, really good to be back. So, any final closing thoughts from you, my man?
I was just thinking we might have to cue some Return to the Mac at the end of this episode. We're back, but if you guys are watching it, if you've watched this whole thing, we appreciate you guys. We'd love to hear your ideas for things we could talk about in the future. We'd love to see you at church. We want to build a community, so we hope you're already subscribed. Tell your friends about the show. Tell your family about the show. Hit us up personally. We want to hear from you. So if you've watched this far, we appreciate you guys. We're glad we're back and able to chat. So unless you got anything else, I think that concludes episode 15 of Men of the Kingdom. And if you've made it this far,
keep advancing the kingdom. We'll see you on the next one, guys. Thank you.